The Galactic Empire and its handling of rebel insurgents has been extensively analyzed and criticized in the past. Many of these criticisms have been directly traced back to a single military doctrine. But what was this doctrine? And more importantly, how did it end up failing the Empire in the end? Wilhuff Tarkin has been shown extensively in both mainline Star Wars canon and Legends. His importance to the development of the early Empire has been made abundantly clear, and there is no doubt that he was a cunning and effective military strategist for both the Galactic Republic and the later Galactic Empire. However, what is perhaps the most famous piece of his legacy has been met with much scrutiny over the years: the Tarkin Doctrine. The Tarkin Doctrine itself refers to a speech Tarkin made shortly after his ascension to the rank of Grand Moff in the early years of the Empire. The diction of the speech makes it clear that this initial version of the so-called Tarkin Doctrine is meant to serve mainly as a political tool, to justify the expansion of not only the imperial military, but the imperial bureaucracy as well. The doctrine is commonly broken down into 3 different sections or paragraphs, each with their own message. The first section of the Tarkin Doctrine analyzes the fall of the Republic. It displays Tarkin's views on how the division present in the Galactic Senate and the division present between the core and outer worlds ultimately led to the downfall of the previous galactic government. He also makes very clear in this section and the rest of the speech that these problems were rooted in an inherent pursuit of self-interest found in the Republic's political body. The second section highlights Tarkin's praise for the Emperor and his beliefs. It also outlines how the implementation of a new system of galactic sectors and oversectors will help improve the overall cohesion of the galaxy. By establishing sector governments that work to better their own planets while also following a single goal set by the Emperor, Tarkin believes that the galactic community can reach a sort of equilibrium. Finally, the third section explains the apparent necessity of strong leaders capable of the effective exercise of power. And most importantly, it expresses Tarkin's view on the need for a powerful and expansive military to keep imperial interests safe from those who would seek to harm the state. This section alludes heavily to Tarkin's long-held belief in rule by fear, which essentially boils down to ruling by fear of force rather than force itself. As stated at the beginning of this video, the main question this analysis seeks to answer is, why exactly did the Tarkin Doctrine end up failing the Empire so drastically towards the final days of the Galactic Civil War? I think it's important to first take a look at why the Doctrine, or at least parts of the Doctrine, were actually very beneficial to the Empire earlier on in its lifespan. For example, Tarkin's establishment of oversectors was a relatively sound strategy compared to the previous ways sectors and star systems went about governing themselves, which was very inconsistent. With oversectors, imperial reign over a certain region of the galaxy was immensely centralized and made more efficient. Grand Moffs were now given unprecedented rule over all civilian and military assets within their assigned oversector. Previously, Imperial Command may have struggled to pursue a rebel threat that escaped a mere hyperspace jump away. In theory, due to the increased cohesion present with oversectors, threats like this would not be as problematic. However, in practice, these sectors and oversectors proved to evolve into a mess of career military officials vying for power and control of their respective sectors, in an effort to present the Emperor with something substantial. This resulted in an environment of backstabbing and undermining fellow officers to achieve the best personal gains. It is arguable that no one presented these behaviors better than Tarkin himself. While we are on the topic of positives, I should mention that the Tarkin Doctrine's push for a large military is also beneficial for obvious reasons, at least when it comes to a galactic-sized government such as the Empire. However, we will now begin to discuss how the galactic-sized military that came to be following the Tarkin Doctrine wasn't nearly as effective as it should have or could have been. As stated earlier, rule by fear was a belief Tarkin held in some way or another for most of his military career. His hope was that a military with an immense projection of power would stop most serious insurgent threats before they could begin. These threats would be stopped through the annihilation of hope. It is very easy to see the effects of rule by fear within the Imperial military. At its height, the Imperial Navy was said to have a combined 25,000 Imperial 1 and 2 class Star Destroyers, both of which were extraordinary capital ships when it came to power projection due to their heavy shields, extensive turbolaser placements, and complement of Imperial stormtroopers. It's no wonder these ships gained a reputation of fear throughout the galaxy, as they were essentially mobile Imperial fortresses, in theory armed with everything needed to hold down a star system. This was all by design, obviously. Everything down to the name of the vessel was crafted to inspire fear. Perhaps even more important than inspiring fear was crushing hope, which the ISD proved very capable of time and time again. There is no doubt that the ISD line of capital ships were formidable, but there is also no doubt that much of their design banked off the fact that one of their primary roles was to play into the Tarkin Doctrine and its premise of rule by fear. But what happens when fear isn't enough, and hope prevails? Imperial Star Destroyers could take on any other capital ship the galaxy had to offer, but lacked or downright failed to counter many other forms of offense, such as snub fighters used by the eventual rebellion. The aforementioned figure of 25,000 ISDs outlines how much Imperial fleet composition relied on these ships. The reason why is simply because they were the pinnacle embodiment of the Tarkin Doctrine. The Imperial Star Destroyer is the easiest example to use when describing the shortcomings of this doctrine, mainly because we've seen its weaknesses exploited throughout Star Wars media in the past. Again, the ISD was formidable, but it was failed by the doctrine in which it served. Even adding a few smaller support ships to Imperial fleets could have solved these issues, such as the Lancer-class frigate, which in the few cases we have of its use, has performed extremely well against enemy starfighters. The only problem the Lancer, and many other ships for that matter, seemed to have was that they didn't fit well into the initial idea of the Tarkin Doctrine, and thus their production and use is notably low across the galaxy. The criticisms of the Tarkin Doctrine don't stop at just the Navy. Even looking at vehicles like the all-terrain armored transport provide a glimpse of Tarkin's ideals. The AT-AT towers above the battlefield and inspires a similar sense of dread that the ISD does. But once again, whenever a rebel threat emerges and actually decides to take on the AT-AT, it proves to be less than reliable. That's not to say it's an all-around terrible vehicle, but several design elements were quite obviously overlooked. By this point, we have established that Imperial military design is flawed, but these flaws do not compare to the over-reliance on the rule of fear presented by the construction of the DS-1 orbital battle station. The Death Star represents the quintessential essence of Tarkin's beliefs. Surely no sane-minded individual would consider opposing Imperial rule with something so overwhelmingly destructive in play. But once again, the Tarkin Doctrine was broken by the enemy with one simple strategy: hope.